Hola! Today, we are learning how to conjugate ER and IR verbs. I am Teacher Catalina and I teach Spanish. If you're here to learn Spanish or to improve your Spanish, you found the right channel. So, I would like to invite you to click the subscribe button so that you can find all of our video lessons much easier. To my loyal viewers, thank you so much. Muchas gracias, as you give me the chance to continue doing this and provide free Spanish lessons for everybody. For more resources and some awesome PDF handouts, go to teachercatalina.com. And if at any point during this video you feel like smashing that like button, I would certainly appreciate it, as it really helps my channel. So let's get into today's topics. Like I said before, we are learning how to conjugate ER and IR verbs. During our last lesson, we learned how to conjugate AR verbs. And that was a really good lesson to start with because a lot of the things that we learned there, we're going to use here today. So let's do a very quick review in case you missed that lesson. And if you want to watch that lesson, go ahead and check here so that you can go ahead and watch it. But the main thing that we need to remember is that infinitives are verbs that have not been conjugated. We said that in Spanish, they end in AR, ER, and IR. And in English, they're your two verbs. To dance, to sleep, to eat. Basically, we don't know who's performing the action. Conjugation is when we change that verb in the infinitive to match the person that is performing the action, so that we know who is performing the action. That way, we can say, I eat, you sleep, they dance. The two parts of a verb are the following. The AR, ER, or IR is what we call the ending. And whatever's left over, that's what we call the stem. During our last lesson, we focused on AR verbs. So all of our verbs end in AR. In today's lesson, we're going to start with ER verbs. So you'll see a lot of verbs that end in ER. And then a little bit later, we will go over IR verbs, which I'm sure you guessed it. Those are verbs that end in IR. To conjugate a verb, we also talked about that there are two rules. Number one, we are going to get rid of that ending, which in today's case is going to be an ER or an IR. And then we are going to add a new ending, depending on who's performing the action. We said that those endings go according to the subject pronouns. So if you've been working on memorizing those subject pronouns, all you will have to do is memorize the endings today. But if you need a little practice, that's okay. Continue to do so and practice a little bit more until you have those subject pronouns down. So let's look at the verb comer, comer, to eat. As you can see, it ends in ER. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to bring our tijeras, like we did with AR verbs, and we're gonna cut off that ER. Poof! It's gone. Now, we have to add a new ending. So let's learn the endings for ER verbs. Again, the endings are based on our subject pronouns. So let's make sure that we kind of see how they go along. The endings for ER verbs are as follows. For yo, o, tú, es, él, ella, and usted, e, nosotros, hemos, vosotros, eis, and ellos, ellas, and ustedes, en. So again, the endings for ER verbs are o, es, e, hemos, eis, and en. So now let's take our stem of the verb comer because you probably remember that we used our tijeras and we got rid of that ER. Like it was our first rule. So now let's conjugate comer in all of these forms. So let's start with yo. What we're going to do is we're going to add an O. So it would be yo como. I eat. Yo como. Tú comes. You eat. Tú comes. Él, ella, and usted. Remember, él, he, ella, she, usted, you formal. And that would be come. Él come, ella come, usted come. Nosotros or nosotras comemos. Nosotros or nosotras comemos. In Spain, we use vosotros for you guys, so you would say coméis, coméis. And ellos, ellas, and ustedes, we're going to use comen. ellos comen, ellas comen, ustedes, you guys, comen. So as you can see, conjugating ER verbs works exactly like AR verbs, but we have different endings. And they may look a little similar because they are, except this ones have an E, because after all, they are ER verbs. Maybe that'll help you remember. And again, you take off the ending, in this case an ER, and you add a new ending, which we have the endings right here for you to start memorizing. Remember that this works with any regular ER verb. We talked about that not all verbs are regular, so that's something that you want to keep in mind. Here's a list of regular ER verbs that may be useful to you or that I'm pretty sure you may be using them in your Spanish class or that will be useful to you as you continue learning Spanish. Make sure that you know that they are regular ER verbs and, very important to know what they mean. Guess what? Now you know how to conjugate AR verbs and ER verbs. That means we only have IR verbs left to know how to conjugate so that you can be a total conjugation expert of regular AR, ER, and IR verbs. I have good news and I have kind of news. The good news are that when it comes to conjugating IR verbs, you don't have to memorize a whole lot because you already know most of the endings. As a matter of fact, we just learned them. The news are basically that there are two forms that you do have to memorize because they're not the same. So what I'm trying to say is simply that ER and IR verbs have the same endings except for the nosotros and the vosotros forms. Those are different. But again, for the most part, you already know the endings of ER verbs because we just learned them, and we're gonna use the same ones for IR verbs, but paying close attention and remembering that nosotros and vosotros are different. Let's take, for example, the verb escribir. Escribir, that's an IR verb. So we have two rules to learn how to conjugate this verb. Number one, use your tijeras and get rid of that IR. Poof, it's gone. Now we have to add a new ending, which means that we have to learn the endings for IR verbs. So let's start there. Like I told you a few minutes ago, they're very similar to those of ER verbs, except for nosotros and vosotros, which are going to be different. So let's go through the endings first, and then let's conjugate the verb escribir. So for yo, o, for tú, es, for él, ella, and usted, e, for nosotros, imos, for vosotros, is, and for ellos, ellas, and ustedes, en. Now you can see all of them, and you can see they are very similar to ER verbs, except for those nosotros and vosotros, which you do have to keep in mind so that you don't make any mistakes. So now, let's bring back the verb escribir. As you can see, we have the stem because we already got rid of that IR. So let's conjugate it. If I want to say I write, I'm going to say yo escribo. Yo escribo. I write. Tú escribes. Tú escribes. You write. Él, ella, and usted escribe. Escribe. Now, here's where things are a little bit different. Nosotros escribimos. Nosotros escribimos. In Spain, vosotros, you guys, vosotros escribís. Vosotros escribís. And ellos, ellas, and ustedes escriben. Escriben. So again, you can see all of the conjugations of the verb escribir, and you can see that we've used the endings of IR verbs. So let's do a very quick review one more time because I want to make sure that you are super comfortable with conjugations. The way that we conjugate verbs is we're going to take the form of the verb in the infinitive, which basically means it's a verb that ends in AR, ER, or IR. Then we have two rules. Number one, we get rid of the ending. It could be an AR, it could be an ER, or it could be an IR. And rule number two says we're going to add a new ending. And those endings go depending on whether it's an AR verb, an ER verb, or an IR verb. So, since we've discussed that and we have that out of the way, let's go ahead and put together the endings for AR verbs, ER verbs, and IR verbs all together here so that you can see them. So let's go ahead and go through them super quickly. AR verbs, o, as, a, amos, ais, and an. ER verbs, o, es, e, hemos, eis, and en. IR verbs, o, es, e, imos, is, and in. And that's it. That is all there is to conjugation of regular AR, ER, and IR verbs. You should be able to conjugate any regular verb that comes your way, making sure that you follow all of the things that we've discussed in the AR verb lesson and on today's lesson. Couple of reminders. Please remember that if I ask you a question in the tu form, I'm asking you, you need to be able to answer in the yo form, the same way you would do in English. Do you talk a lot? Yes, I talk a lot. So again, if a question is asked in the tu form, you answer in the yo form. The same thing applies for if a question is asked in the ustedes form. I'm asking you guys, do you guys study a lot? Yes, we do. So in that case, you would answer in the nosotros form. So make sure that you keep those things in mind. And finally, if you want to say that you don't do some of those activities, whatever the activity is, you're going to put that no in front of your verb. So for example, ¿tú hablas mucho? ¿Tú hablas mucho? No, no hablo mucho. No, no hablo mucho. ¿Tú escribes cartas? Do you write letters? ¿Tú escribes cartas? Sí, escribo cartas. Or no, no escribo cartas. Remember that when you say no, you need two no's in Spanish. No for your answer, for no, and then the other no that makes that verb negative, kind of like your don't. So no, no escribo cartas. Before you go, I want to make sure that you remember that you can go to teachercatalina.com to get a free handout and all sorts of resources so that you can continue learning or improving your Spanish. And since you are now the conjugation expert, you know what really would help me? If you smash that like button. Remember, it really helps my channel. And again, if you have not yet hit that subscribe button and you want to continue learning with me, this is a great time to click that subscribe button and also the notification bell so that you know when new lessons are posted. Muchas gracias. Nos vemos la próxima vez. I'll see you next time.